May 11th, 1943, Lorient, Brittany. The air in the U-boot Führungsstelle is damp with Atlantic salt and diesel that clings to uniforms. A kettle clicks somewhere behind a partition while a teleprinter rattles its bright metal syllables. In the Yachse, gray dawn, a duty officer lays a decoded Allied convoy notice beside the night plot. An Oberleutnant leans in, pencil tapping, and freezes. The Allied route box mirrors the bearings in their own sealed orders for boats already at sea. A watch officer later wrote that the room felt suddenly smaller, the paper smelling of ink and betrayal. That afternoon, contact reports begin to arrive. Escorts are prowling exactly where U-402 and U-528 were to weave their approach. Depth charges stitching the sea with an almost methodical cadence. There is a traitor, someone murmurs, because the only alternative is unthinkable. It was unthinkable because the machine said so. The Schlüssel machine, M3 for most commands, and, at sea, the newer four-rotor naval set, promised a fortress of permutations, 3 and then 4 rotors stepping with each keystroke, a reflector, doubling pathways, and a plugboard with 10 pairs twisting letters into silence. German officers quoted the number as a comfort charm. 150 quintillion possible keys, enough, they believed, to drown any analyst in centuries of guesswork. Type 7C boats like U-402 and U-528 were built to kill by stealth. Their security was supposed to be as cold and deep as the water they vanished into. But the truth was colder still. Even as Lorient's staff whispered about leaks and loyalty in the quiet lawns of Buckinghamshire, an anonymous estate was already filing their intentions under Reed. Bletchley Park, with bombs humming and notebooks fattening with wheel orders and short signal tables, had learned to read what the Germans thought unseeable: naval keys, call signs, weather shorts, the skeletal timetables of the Atlantic. The shock in May 1943 was only the moment it surfaced. Black May, when wolf packs bled in numbers no one in Lorient had rehearsed. To understand how the myth of invincibility took hold, how trained officers trusted a box of rotors with the life of a fleet, we have to return to the beginning, when Enigma was still a salesman's promise and not yet a battlefield god. Berlin, late winter of 1918. The war had ended in defeat and humiliation, but amid the ashes of the Reich, a young electrical engineer named Arthur Scherbius was already imagining a different kind of weapon. He filed a patent that year for a compact machine of brass rotors and electrical contacts that could turn the alphabet itself into armor. Each key, pressed on its small wooden board, sent a current through a shifting maze of circuits, producing a different letter every time. What began as a commercial idea for bankers and diplomats soon drew the attention of military minds who understood that the next war would not be won by artillery alone, but by secrecy. By 1926, the Kriegsmarine, Germany's reconstituted navy, adopted a naval version for fleet messages, believing that its mechanical elegance made interception meaningless. A single machine with 3 interchangeable rotors offered 26 positions per wheel, and thus 263 possible arrangements, over 17,000 in total. Yet every rotation created exponential depth. Each day's key changed the wiring, and each operator's initial rotor position shifted the code anew. The following years brought refinement after refinement. By 1930, the Wehrmacht's Enigma I introduced a plug board, the Steckerbrett, linking pairs of letters with removable cables, multiplying possibilities beyond human comprehension. Mathematicians at the Cipher office calculated that a brute force solution would require longer than the lifetime of the universe. Men like Wilhelm Fenner in the Chistel insisted that the system was praktisch unlösbar, practically unbreakable. Each midnight, radio men opened sealed envelopes with the next day's key tables, synchronized across every front from Norway's fjords to the dunes of North Africa. The rhythmic clatter of the Enigma's keys became the sound of modern German command, precise, efficient, and coldly inviolable. Across the channel, Allied code clerks still relied on paper ciphers that took hours to prepare. They seemed a century behind. Yet, in an office in Warsaw, 3 quiet mathematicians were already treating Scherbius's proud creation not as magic, but as mathematics. Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Różycki, and Henryk Zygalski of the Polish Cipher Bureau were about to prove that even the most perfect machine could bleed logic, and that the myth of the unbreakable code had already begun to crack. Warsaw, December 1932. Snow sifted across Saxon Palace, muffling the city's tram bells as 3 young mathematicians bent over rows of coded German signals. Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Różycki, and Henryk Zygalski were not soldiers, yet their pencils were about to wound the Reich more deeply than artillery. Guided by intercepted message headers and a handful of secret key lists, documents smuggled from Berlin by French intelligence through a disillusioned clerk named Hans Thilo Schmidt, codename Asche, Rejewski began to treat the enigma not as a cipher, but as an algebraic function. Within weeks, he had derived equations that mirrored the hidden wiring of its 3 rotors. By the end of the year, he and his colleagues had built a working replica, Poland's own Enigma, crafted by the Ava Radio Works under tight secrecy in Warsaw. Over the next years, their methods evolved into engineering brilliance. Rejewski devised characteristics tables that allowed analysts to deduce rotor order and ring settings each day. Różycki contributed the clock method for detecting rotor motion. Zygalski developed perforated Zygalski sheets, layered grids that filtered possible keys by eliminating contradictions. By 1938, the team constructed the Bomba Kryptologiczna, 6 synchronized electromechanical drums that could test rotor combinations automatically. This machine, beating steadily like a mechanical heart, granted the Poles continuous access to Wehrmacht communications for nearly 7 years. Entire divisions maneuvered, convoys sailed, and orders circulated under the illusion of secrecy, never realizing that the Cipher Bureau was reading them almost in real time. But in late 1938, Germany altered its procedures, adding 2 more plugboard pairs and revising message formats, expanding the search space beyond Polish resources. When invasion loomed the following summer, Rejewski's group faced an impossible choice: preserve their secret or pass it on. In July 1939, inside the pine-lined Pyry Forest south of Warsaw, they met British and French cryptologists and handed over everything: blueprints, rotors, notebooks, and the logic that made them work. When Poland fell, the trio fled through Romania and France, continuing their work in exile. Their algebraic insight had transformed Enigma from mystery into mathematics. What remained was for Britain to turn that fragile spark into an industrial war machine of code-breaking, a task soon to find its home at Bletchley Park. September 1939. The last trains out of London ran with their lights dimmed, and the air along the channel smelled of fuel and fear. As Luftwaffe bombers probed the coast, a convoy of lorries rolled quietly into Buckinghamshire, carrying crates of cipher machines, typewriters, and files stamped most secret. Their destination was an unassuming Victorian manor surrounded by oaks and iron fences, Bletchley Park. It would soon become the most important brain in the Allied war effort. Commander Alistair Denniston of the Government Code and Cipher School oversaw its hurried transformation from country estate to cryptologic fortress. Within its drafty corridors gathered an unlikely army: mathematicians, linguists, Egyptologists, and even crossword champions, all bound by the same riddle, the German enigma. Among them was a reserved, sharp-minded Cambridge mathematician named Alan Turing. Where others saw endless permutation, Turing saw pattern and probability. Using the Polish groundwork as his foundation, he proposed a machine that would think in logic instead of guesswork, a mechanized chain of reasoning capable of stripping away impossibilities until only the correct enigma settings remained. His design became the British bomb, an electromechanical array of rotating drums, circuits, and relays that could mimic Enigma's internal pathways at extraordinary speed. By March 1940, the first operational unit, nicknamed Victory, stood, humming at the British Tabulating Machine Company's plant in Letchworth. Each bomb could test 17,576 possible rotor combinations per minute, guided by cribs, suspected fragments of German plain text, such as Heil Hitler, Wetter Vorhersage, or unit call signs repeated in reports. When a run produced logical consistency across all electrical circuits, it pointed the cryptanalysts toward that day's key. As 1940 closed, dozens of bombs filled huts across Britain, their synchronized thrum a mechanical heartbeat of the secret war. Within hours of transmission, Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht messages were being read under the classification Ultra. Only a few hundred souls in all of Britain knew it existed, and soon that knowledge would decide the fate of ships battling unseen across the Atlantic. North Atlantic, winter, 1941. The sea was a graveyard of gray steel. Between Iceland and Newfoundland, the Allied convoys moved like wounded herds, their wakes haunted by periscopes and white trails of torpedoes. Admiral Karl Donitz's Rudel tactic, the Wolf Pack system, was strangling Britain's lifeline. Between 1940 and early 1941, over 2 million tons of Allied shipping vanished beneath the waves. At Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, and Wilhelmshaven, radio operators fed a steady pulse of Enigma-encoded Hydra signals to coordinate the attacks, each message scattering boats across 3,000 miles of ocean. On German charts, it looked like mastery, mathematical precision guiding the silent empire of the deep. Yet in the spring of 1941, a single capture changed everything. On May 9, 1941, HMS Bulldog and HMS Albrightia forced U-110 to the surface near Iceland after a savage depth-charge chase. As the submarine's crew abandoned ship, Lieutenant David Baum's boarding party clambered down the conning tower and found an unthinkable prize, an intact Enigma machine, its rotors in place, along with cipher tables, signal logs, and the current naval key. The documents were rushed to Bletchley Park under absolute secrecy. Within weeks, British bombs began decrypting kriegsmarine orders that had once seemed untouchable. Now convoys turned just hours before ambush. Coastal Command aircraft appeared over refueling coordinates moments after U-boats surfaced to recharge batteries. To Donitz's staff, it felt like sorcery. He ordered counterintelligence reviews, suspecting traitors or new Allied detection devices. Yet every explanation faltered. Even after the introduction of the four-rotor M4 Enigma in February 1942, Bletchley's grip returned when sailors aboard HMS Petard boarded the sinking U-559 in October 1942, seizing new keybooks, and later when U-505 fell intact to American forces in June 1944. By late 1943, the balance was irreversible. Monthly Allied losses dropped below 300,000 tons, while U-boat sinkings soared. The hunters had become the hunted. And in Donitz's command bunkers, officers whispered about an invisible betrayal, the sense that somewhere, somehow, the ocean itself had turned against them. By late 1943, deep within the Kriegsmarine command centers at Carnival near Lorient and Rue de la Bourse in Paris, anxiety had begun to eclipse confidence. Reports arriving on Admiral Karl Donitz's desk described an impossible pattern: Allied ships avoiding ambushes, aircraft arriving over refueling coordinates minutes before rendezvous, convoys diverting along alternate routes before any U-boat even sighted them. Donitz ordered a full cryptographic review, summoning his best signals officers to question what none dared to admit. Could Enigma itself be compromised? For nearly a decade it had been treated as sacred, a machine whose complexity guaranteed invulnerability. The official figures were repeated like prayer beads, 158 million possible settings. No mortal, they insisted, could hope to pierce it. The inquiry rooms filled with tension and tobacco smoke. Communications engineers insisted that the fault lay with men, not machines. Operators miscopying daily keys, careless radio discipline, or missing rotor changes under stress. Others whispered about spies within the BDU staff. Yet even under interrogation, no one could supply evidence of betrayal. The idea that British mathematicians might have reduced their cipher to logic tables and circuits seemed preposterous, almost heretical to the German faith in precision engineering. One officer later recalled that Enigma's reputation had replaced God as our guarantee of order. A few commands experimented with elaborate countermeasures, double encryptions, extra plugboard cables, even inserting deliberate errors to confuse listeners. These only clogged communications and delayed orders. At Bletchley Park, analysts noted the procedural chaos with quiet satisfaction. Every new improvement created fresh cribs, predictable phrases, and redundant headers that made decoding even faster. In Berlin, cryptanalyst Rudolf Schaufler reassured superiors that no machine on Earth could compute such permutations. But machines were already doing precisely that in the English countryside. As Donitz's boards collapsed into finger-pointing and fatigue, morale within the signals branch sank. Paranoia became routine, and while Germany searched for traitors, the Allies prepared to wield their invisible advantage on the largest scale yet against the continent itself. By 1943, the quiet lawns of Bletchley Park had become a forest of cables and machinery. The mansion's stables and huts now roared with the sound of rotating drums, relay clicks, and ventilators fighting the heat from hundreds of motors. More than 200 bombs operated day and night, each weighing over a ton and consuming 3 kilowatts of power. Their miles of wire spun in hypnotic rhythm, imitating the rotors of thousands of German Enigmas. To an outsider, it looked like chaos. To those inside Hut 11A, it was the mechanical heartbeat of a new kind of warfare, machines battling machines. Each bomb tested thousands of potential Enigma rotor combinations per second, stripping away impossibilities until a likely key alignment emerged. Across the Atlantic, American engineers at the National Cash Register Company in Dayton, Ohio, led by Joseph Desch, built their own giant bombs for the U.S. Navy. The American models, powered by vacuum tube logic and relay banks, could test nearly 500 million rotor positions each day, an achievement unimaginable only 3 years earlier. Together, British and American units formed the largest coordinated code-breaking enterprise in history. At Bletchley, more than 10,000 men and women kept the system alive, 75% of them from the Women's Royal Naval Service, the Wrens. They handled punch cards, logged intercepted radio traffic from listening posts known as Y stations, operated Typex cipher machines, and couriered the results under the code name Ultra. Each decrypted message was typed, sealed, and dispatched through guarded channels to Allied high commands on a strictly need-to-know basis. By mid-1944, ultra-intelligence influenced roughly 1 in 3 Royal Navy convoy decisions, steering fleets across the Atlantic with uncanny precision. The war's most decisive front no longer lay in the trenches or skies. It thrummed beneath Bletchley's wooden rafters, where mathematics, electricity, and human intuition had merged into an invisible factory of logic and steel. Soon, its output would shape the greatest invasion the world had ever seen, Operation Overlord. Spring 1944. In the converted stables of Bletchley Park, the bombs spun relentlessly as lines of intercepts arrived from across occupied Europe. Among them were fragments from Panzergruppe West, OB West, and Luftflotte III, each decrypted and assembled into a mosaic of enemy expectations. What emerged was priceless. The German High Command remained convinced that the coming Allied invasion would strike not at Normandy, but at the Pas de Calais. The elaborate Allied deception plan, Operation Fortitude, was working, and ultra-decrypts confirmed it beyond doubt. Daily Enigma traffic reported construction of new defenses facing Calais, while troop movements along the Norman coast stayed minimal. With this assurance, General Dwight D. Eisenhower and his staff fixed the invasion date for June 6, 1944. When D-Day dawned, Ultra became the silent companion of every commander at sea. As Allied troops stormed the beaches, Bletchley Park continued to read German signals almost as they were sent. Reports from coastal artillery batteries, Luftwaffe command posts, and naval flotillas were decrypted within hours. Some relayed to the Admiralty in less than 3. At 090, intercepted traffic confirmed that the German 7th Army still believed the Normandy assault was a diversion. By the time Field Marshal von Rundstedt's pleas for armored reinforcements reached Hitler's headquarters, the dictator's insistence on personal authorization delayed any counterattack until the Allies had already secured the beaches. To men like Rommel, returning from Germany after an air raid had obliterated his own headquarters at La Roche-Guyon. The speed of Allied anticipation felt supernatural. Orders seemed intercepted before they were spoken. Reinforcements moved into ambushes as if guided by an invisible hand. Officers muttered about radio leaks, spies, even witchcraft, but never about Enigma. The machine still symbolized perfection, and no one could imagine that its whirring rotors had been turned against them. After the war, when the truth finally emerged, many refused to believe it. Yet in every landing craft, in every airborne drop, Ultra had been there, unseen but decisive, ensuring that secrecy itself became the Allies' greatest weapon. Inside the huts of Bletchley Park, victory felt both invisible and exhausting. The cryptanalysts lived by the rhythm of the bombs, 12-hour shifts of ceaseless whirring, punctuated by cups of watery tea and the scratch of pencils over cipher sheets. No headlines, no medals, no public acknowledgement could mark their successes. Official secrecy forbade even a hint of their work to family or friends. Yet they carried a quiet certainty that each message broken might save hundreds of sailors from drowning, or bomber crews from vanishing into night skies over Europe. Their battleground was logic, their weapons algebra and patience. Across the Channel, the psychological tide ran in reverse. In the war rooms of the Kriegsmarine and Wehrmacht, unease metastasized into fear. Orders meant to be untraceable seemed anticipated, countered, or destroyed before execution. Admiral Hubertus von Blank wrote of uncanny coincidences between encrypted directives and Allied interception patterns. Commanders began to censor themselves, avoiding sensitive instructions over radio and reverting to couriers, a regression that fatally slowed operations in a mechanized war. The machine that had once embodied German certainty now radiated distrust. For the men and women at Bletchley, this unraveling of enemy confidence was tangible even from afar. They saw it in panicked German SOS calls, in fractured command chains, in repeated requests for clarification that revealed doubt spreading through the ranks. Many operators felt an unexpected moral weight, victory achieved not by gunfire but by silence. "We fought with pencils," one Wren later said, and sometimes the pencils felt heavier than rifles. The clash between Enigma and the human mind had become a war within a war, a contest between secrecy and reason that redefined modern intelligence. As 1945 neared, the cipher that once promised invincibility crumbled alongside the Reich itself, undone by the quiet persistence of those who had turned mathematics into a weapon. By the opening months of 1945, the Reich was collapsing on every front. Allied columns poured across the Rhine while bombers traced fire through the night skies of a dying empire. Yet even amid the thunder of artillery, the quiet hum of Bletchley Park's bombs continued. Every morning, sheets of decrypted Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe traffic arrived at Allied command posts within hours of transmission. German messages about troop withdrawals, fuel shortages, and desperate orders for non-existent reinforcements were being read almost in real time. The war of machines had turned decisively into a rout of minds. As the Red Army closed on Berlin, retreating German units were ordered to destroy all cipher equipment. Codebooks were thrown into bonfires. Enigma machines were smashed with rifle butts or dumped into rivers. Still, hundreds survived, captured intact from headquarters, submarines, and bunkers, and soon Allied intelligence warehouses overflowed with the once sacred devices. Each broken rotor or scorched plug board marked the end of an illusion that had ruled German communications for nearly 2 decades. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler's suicide in the Führer bunker symbolically extinguished the empire of the cipher. 1 week later, from the naval station at Flensburg, a final Enigma transmission flickered across the ether. "We are closing down now. All the best. Goodbye." When it reached Bletchley, the line brought a silence more profound than celebration. After 6 years of secrecy, exhaustion, and invisible warfare, the cryptographers had witnessed the death of their adversary in a single farewell message. When the Allies revealed, after the war, that Enigma had been broken since 1940, disbelief spread through German ranks. Some officers accused the victors of forgery. Others admitted the truth only after reading declassified reports decades later. Their denial became the cipher's last defense, proof of how deeply its myth had taken hold. Yet from its ashes rose a new kind of power, the age of electronic intelligence, where code-breaking would evolve into computing itself. The war of secrecy was over, but its legacy was only beginning. When the guns fell silent, another revolution had already begun, one born not from battlefields, but from the logic that had conquered Enigma. The machines designed for code breaking had proven something unprecedented, that reasoning itself could be mechanized. Alan Turing's wartime concepts of algorithmic deduction became the blueprint for post-war computing. Within months of victory, engineers at Bletchley and Dallas Hill developed Colossus II, the first large-scale electronic computer, followed by prototypes that evolved into stored program systems. What began as a desperate effort to outthink a cipher had sparked the dawn of digital computation. Historians later estimated that ultra-intelligence shortened the war in Europe by as much as 2 years and saved more than 14 million lives. Yet for decades, those responsible could not speak of it. The Official Secrets Act sealed Bletchley's achievements until the 1970s, when the ultra-secret finally entered public record. By then, many former Wrens and cryptanalysts were elderly, living quiet lives, astonished that their anonymous toil had become the foundation of the information age. Their mechanical bombs and logical flow diagrams had evolved into circuits, processors, and global networks. Enigma's defeat proved an enduring truth. No cipher is invincible against organized intellect and industrial logic. Modern cybersecurity, quantum encryption, and intelligence infrastructures all trace their lineage to that contest between German engineering and Allied mathematics. For Germany, the machine remained both pride and curse, a symbol of technical mastery undone by its own predictability. Today, museum halls display enigmas beside early computers, reminders that the struggle between secrecy and understanding never ends. In the end, it was not machinery but imagination, human ingenuity itself, that defined security. And it was this lesson, drawn from silence and secrecy, that shaped the digital world that followed. When captured U-boat officers learned that Enigma had been broken for years, many simply refused to believe it. In Allied interrogation rooms across England and Norway, men who had once trusted the machine more than their own instincts sat in stunned silence. Some argued that the Allies must have discovered a new physics, an impossible method of listening through steel and water. Others replayed the Atlantic battles in their minds, counting every vanished convoy, every ambush that had failed, now haunted by the thought that their coded words had guided the enemy's hand. The humiliation cut deeper than defeat on the battlefield. They had not been outgunned but outthought, undone by unseen mathematicians and engineers who fought their war with spinning drums, logic circuits, and relentless patience. Enigma's fall was not the failure of German precision, but a triumph of human intellect over absolute faith in machinery. Every decrypted message, once shielded by astronomical probability, became evidence of how pride can blind even the most disciplined minds. The war of codes ended without a shot, yet its echoes reshaped every war that followed. Today, the remaining enigmas rest behind museum glass, their keys frozen mid-turn, symbols of both brilliance and illusion. They remind us that secrecy dies the moment understanding begins, and that persistence, more than power, bends the course of history. The signal that once commanded fleets and empires now transmits only silence.